I'm talking about returning the dignity and the sovereignty of holy birth and the sanctity of the family back to the family. And then if there is a medical need, you use a medical service. But it shouldn't be as that necessary.
Welcome to The Discerning Mother, the podcast for Jesus-loving moms who want to tune out the noise and tune into God's design for motherhood. I'm Bridget Divaldi, a board-certified women's health coach, holistic health practitioner, birth nerd, and homeschooling mom of 5. I help moms to heal their minds and bodies, trust their instincts, and embrace the beauty of the way God created them. Here we talk about birth, hormones, motherhood, faith, and anything else. Let's go. All right, so welcome back. And I'm here today with Billie Harrigan. I'm so excited to chat with her. I personally went through her TBC and trauma-informed training program, and I'm so excited to get the information out there to everybody listening. And so just a really quick welcome, Billie.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Yeah, so let me read your bio really fast and then we can kind of dive into it. So Billie Harrigan is an integrative health consultant with nearly 40 years of experience serving birthing families. Her journey into birth work began after her own challenging first birth experience, which led her to explore and advocate for more holistic and empowering approaches to childbirth. Throughout her career, Billie has served as a traditional birth companion, childbirth educator, lactation counselor, and lay pastoral counselor. She is the founder and director of Birth Trauma Ontario. Billie advocates for restoring common wisdom to families, aiming for gentle and empowered birth experiences. And she has also experienced the Hive Collective, which, side note, is amazing, and is a private member association dedicated to reclaiming sovereignty over personal and familial well-being. And we're going to chat more about her TBC program as well because it's so good. But again, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah. So just, can you give like a little bit more info just about who you are, how many kids you have, where you are in the world, that sort of thing?
I'm in Ontario, Canada, and I've got 7 adult children and 5 grandbabies. And of course, because I'm Nana, I think they're flawless. They're perfect.
I'm sure that they are.
They are. And I've mostly retired from being in the birth room. So I dedicate my time and expertise to training a new generation, an army of traditional birth companions that can offer an alternative. You know, for those that want the medical model, or what I call the cartel, it's right there. For those who would like to go solo or just be with friends, that's great. It's there too. And for those that would like a holistic companion that has knowledge and skills, well, that's kind of the gap that I'm filling.
Yeah. So I've personally gone through your TBC program. I forget which cohort, 2023, maybe? I think it was. Yeah. And I absolutely loved it. And so
I'm so glad.
Whenever I was going through, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with the knowledge, because I do have, at the time I had 4 little kids, now I have 5 little kids, so I wasn't sure I wanted to be going to births or attending births rather, but I've really taken it and I used it as my own personal I don't even know how to just say it, my own personal birth transformation program. And I've also taken it and used it with clients too. And so how can you tell us a little bit about the program? What inspired you to create it? How much time it took you to create it, everything like that?
Well, I've been kind of solo here in Ontario, the only one kind of doing this for many, many, many years. Of course, there have been, the odd sprinkling of someone who wanted to stay very much under the radar because the regulated professions don't understand that this is not that, and nor do they care. So there's a great deal of territorialism and a lot of foot stomping that comes from the regulated ones of no, my do it, only me, my do it. And so I have been very vocal and public and kind of the only one. And then I thought, well, before I retire, it's not wise, given the way the industry is on the cusp of collapse. It's just the law of diminishing returns. And at the time I had no idea, COVIDiocy hadn't started. So I didn't have the idea of how extensive the rot was. A pretty good idea, but it's worse than rot.
Yeah.
It's intentional harm. It's cruelty to the next level. So I thought, well, before I retire, I've got to train them. And so basically I just got a brain fart and thought, well, I'm got to start a program. And I wrote it from scratch. Between the companion course and the trauma-informed course, it's backed by over 1,000 academic references. I don't say anything I can't back up 6 ways to Sunday. I don't make things up. Everything is thoroughly vetted. And both of them are living courses. As new information becomes available, if anything has, we gain new understanding, then that part is updated or a section is added. So it's like the course is never going to be complete, nor should it. It should always have ongoing information, ongoing updates. So it's preparing the candidates to companion with families from preconception to parenting. It's filling in the gaps of knowledge that are solely lacking in the entire birth industry and the birth realm. And I don't know if that's intentional. I think it is, because with a lack of birth knowledge, we are not the common neighbor helping each other because we don't know how anymore. And that information has just been decimated from us over the course of perhaps 2 generations. And this supposed knowledge is being held by the medicalized maternity services industry. But they got it wrong. They got it wrong in the first place.
Yes.
And then they're just building upon faulty premises and building on the wrong understanding of women's experiences of birth. And as they continue to build on it from what they got wrong in the first place, it's turned into this nightmare that far too many experience as a nightmare. Can the medical industry save from time to time? Heck yes, and they should. That's what it's there for. The medical industry is there to deliver medical services in a medical situation. Mm-hmm. Birth is not inherently medical. Occasionally it needs medical help, and that's why it exists. But the problem we have is that it's taking a normal physiological function of a woman's sexual experience, and I mean that in the reproductive and as well as the ecstatic sense. They're taking this normal function of women's sexuality and putting it into an unholy medical setting, dissecting it, minimizing her. She's almost irrelevant to the entire process. And if you read the research literature carefully, she most often is irrelevant. And what that does is it decimates her. It hurts the baby, destroys the integrity of her connection to her and her family. It sidelines her husband, her partner, so that he is disempowered in the corner, watching terrible things being done to her. And he's supposed to accept this as saving her life. And it was just wrong. And what we have right now is something that is hurting far too many women than they're saving. And because so much of their premise and their behavior is based on getting it wrong in the first place, is hard to know. Did they do something that saved her, or would it have not been an issue in the first place? We know 1/3 to 1/2 of women do not need to be cut open to have their babies extracted. But what about the time that she did? How do we know? We're at the point we don't even know. We don't know if one of them actually was life-saving and the rest of them were just BS. We don't know. So the lack of trust in going into this industry for medical services is rampant. And they've done it to themselves. They have no one to blame but themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much wisdom in what you were just saying. And again, I was lucky enough to be able to sit as you're training me and my cohort. And I just want to say, I can attest that there is so much, the courses that you've created are so well researched, and that there's so much knowledge in there. And that, like you said, that you're putting in new things. So I remember specifically whenever you were giving us a training and you were talking about mastitis. And what you were saying, I had never heard before. It was always the standard, what it is that they tell you, where it's nurse to pull it out. And then whenever you came in with this new information, it was whoa. And I actually ended up having some issues with myself. So I put in practice what it is that you taught us. And it was gone within a day.
Amazing.
And even then, it was more than that, where it's I gave myself permission to sit and relax and do nothing, which is also a huge part of it too, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down. And so I know why your program is called a TBC, but can you explain why you, how you came up with that, what it is, and why it's different than maybe what people are used to hearing?
Well, because I live in an area of the world where midwifery is a regulated profession, it means I cannot use the word midwife if I am not also registered, because it's a protected practice. Just you can't say, hey, I'm a doctor if you're not a doctor. So I can't say I'm a midwife because I'm not part of that. I have the skills of a midwife. I have the knowledge of a midwife. I know how to apply what would be called midwifery in other settings, but where I live, I can't do that. So I have to come up with something else. Birth keeper was not in my realm of consciousness at the time, and it just didn't resonate with me anyway. Traditional birth attendant is a very common expression that is known throughout the world. The World Health Organization, that great colonizer, has been on a tear for the last couple of generations of trying to eliminate traditional birth attendants and replace them with medically trained midwives throughout the world. So there are pockets of the world where there are traditional birth attendants. They might be called a nana, they might be called the dai. There are places where it still exists, but the WHO is still working hard to eliminate them. So I didn't want to use the word traditional birth attendant, plus I also drive the locals apoplectic. So if I use that, that would probably, I don't know what that would do to them. I thought, what is this more like? It is more like being a traditional birth companion. I'm not just attending them in birth. I am companioning with them as they make decisions for themselves based on accurate information, as they are taking responsibility for their own journey. And whatever that is, that's up to them to decide. What I can offer them is accurate information, trust and belief in their personal wisdom, because nobody cares more about their own life, if they're reasonably healthy, or their own baby's life than the woman who's living it.
Yeah.
So she's most invested in her own life and her own baby's life. Well, why don't we tune into that and stop the disempowering and the fear-mongering, and to work to build resilience in each of the women we companion with? And that's part of the trauma-informed portion of the course. Sadly, I became a subject matter expert in obstetric violence and the causes of birth-related trauma, which meant I better start finding out what the solutions are. And in that regard, we take, within the TPC course, as you know, we take a resilience-based approach that each woman is capable of getting to her own healing. She is capable of making intelligent choices. And what we see as a person who has not faced that level of adversity, we might say, whoa, that's pretty dysfunctional and maladaptive behavior. Well, not to her, it wasn't. That's what got her from there to here. Well, why don't we build on that? Not to reinforce what a healthy person would call maladaptive behavior, but to say, wow, what did you survive? What happened to you? And so that's the approach we take.
I think that last part is so important, especially in moms who did just experience difficult things around birth, where they so often are told, like, well, the typical, like, thank goodness your baby's healthy. Like, that's all that really matters. And, like, thank goodness you were in the hospital, or that you were around medical professionals or whatever. When in reality, it's like, that's just one tiny little piece of it. Like, obviously it's a big piece, but like in the grand scheme of it, it's so small because all these other little things have built up to what she's experiencing in her birth. And yeah, I just think that it's so interesting. So how do you see birth as a reflection of a woman's overall mindset, beliefs, personal growth journey, any of that?
Birth is not separate from anything else.
Yep.
We're integrated beings. We are, spirit, soul, mind, emotions in a physical container. There's nothing, disintegrated about us, except, that again was part of how medicine got it wrong, because it was taking an approach where the understanding of the world was that it was a great machine best understood by taking it apart and examining its small parts, which is why we've got neurology, nephrology, rheumatology, all of these hematology, all the ologies, and then obstetrics. That kind of looks at a woman between her knockers and her knees to see what's going on in that little portion of her body. Well, she's a fully integrated being. Birth is part of her integrated experience as anything else is. And of course, every part of her comes into play. What probably also comes into play that we maybe don't understand clearly yet, but we're getting there, is the impact of her mother's experience. And what about her grandmother's experience? We probably carry that inside of us too. Before I was ever, even when I was a teenager, I used to have very vivid birth dreams. And I know that can be, symbolic of birthing an idea or something. It can be that. But I felt very intuitively that I was reenacting a memory. Wow. But I was a teenager and I was reenacting a memory. And I think that was a genetic memory stored within me. So we're very, our birth expression isn't just, you've got a labor pain or your water breaks, rush to the hospital, get an epidural, don't feel anything, get that epidural, and then go home and, wonder why you can't breastfeed.
Yeah, seriously. And so many women do struggle to trust their instincts around birth. Like, I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to who are like, I really want to have a home birth, or I want to do this sort of thing. But, and it's like there's so much fear around that. So, or not even just fear, but like, I want to say imprinting and programming that we've, just because of the way that we live, we see. So how can women like really begin to rebuild that trust in themselves and maybe figure out what it is that they want and like shut out the noise of the world?
They probably benefit from going down the rabbit hole of mind control. And if they took a little dip down that rabbit hole to understand how most of our decisions have been pre-programmed for us, and to look at the imaging and the repetition to see how we've been pre-programmed. Yeah. The pre-programming is birth is the single most dangerous thing that will ever happen to you in your life. And you will never be closer to death than when that baby is in your birth canal. Yeah, so, that's the programming. And what's going to save you? Well, get to the hospital. That's the Church of Medicine, and let the priest there take care of things. So it's the programming. Go down and find out what mind control is, and to understand the repetition, what's in our environment, the incessant messaging, to unpack that and think, oh, wow, I'm not having an independent thought. So when they say they're not tuned into their instincts, well, how can they be? Our instincts have been highly programmed. So taking a look at that and finding out what's the messaging, where is it coming from, and then to change the messaging. You got to surround yourself and kind of reprogram and retrain your thought patterns. It's not that hard. You just have to be very aware of it.
Well, and that's the thing is like so many, I know personally for me, before I had my awakening, I'll call it, I didn't even know that there was a community like physically located around me. And I didn't know any of that. And so I didn't even know how to tap into that community. And so thankfully I found one person who was a chiropractor actually, who sort of steered the way for that, and very thankful for that. But how do you even, especially because a lot of the women that were in the TBC program with me were in like more rural areas. It's not like we're all in big cities. So how do we even like begin to tap in to try to find people that could help us reprogram?
Yeah, the good question. I guess it depends on where you live.
Well, I'm thinking too, even just like your Hive community.
Yeah, come to the Hive community and, tap into people online, and eventually you'll find somebody close to you, or you start just having conversations and you find out somebody that resonates with it, wherever you are. For you, it was at the chiropractors. And sometimes you just have to start the community.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And, okay, so I know a little bit about your story and like how you have become to be so vocal and public and like unashamedly yourself. But how did you find the strength to do that? And like, how can others find the strength to stand up and like actually do what they want to do?
I think for a lot of us, it comes through overcoming adversity, where, we live in a culture that's very afraid of adversity, but that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. When you get through a lot of adversity and you find out how strong you are. I mean, I say I'm the most resilient person I know because I have managed through a great deal of adversity, and that has made me, now, and also I would say, well, God gave me more courage than good.
No, it is so hard though, because again, so many women that I support, they always say like, well, I want to do this, but maybe my husband is saying this, or like my moms and mother-in-laws are saying this sort of thing. Or even I'm just thinking of this one client in particular. Her son is like 14 months old or something, and she's pregnant now, and she really wants her baby to sleep through the night, like her 14-month-old to sleep through the night. But she also still co-sleeps. And she's like, I don't even know how to navigate that, because if I try to ask anybody about it, they're like, oh, just sleep train. And her body's telling her like, no, I don't want to sleep train. So like just cutting through the noise is so challenging in the world today. And like finding that strength is so hard.
Yeah, I don't sleep through the night. I don't know what the big deal is.
I know, isn't that funny?
No, none of my kids slept through the night until maybe as late teenagers.
Yeah.
Maybe then through a growth spurt, but no, just stop worrying about it. Of the 7, I would think, okay, this one's going to be a sleeper. Never got one. Okay.
I'll survive.
I survived. I had little people that could pull all-nighters on me.
Yeah.
Good grief, I couldn't even do that in university.
I know, isn't that so funny? And so I'm just curious, you mentioned that you're an expert in obstetric violence. first off, what is obstetric violence? And second, how did you become an expert in it?
Well, subject matter, yes. Obstetric is the client, not the perpetrator. It is the obstetric client. It is the woman in her childbearing experience who is the recipient of what we call violence. Those who work in the industry don't like that word. I know it makes us very sad. They would prefer we said mistreatment. But it's not just mistreatment. It's a violation of her consent, which they often don't recognize, of her dignity, her sanctity, her safety. A woman who is told, you will submit to this or we're calling Child Protective Services, that's obstetric violence.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. To demand compliance, being forced to accept a medical intervention, glucose testing.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't, we won't know if you have diabetes, and then your baby could be huge and then will get stuck and then may die. So that's on you. That's obstetric violence by coercing and forcing her. So can it include physical things like slapping and pinching? Of course it can. But it also includes, you wouldn't be treated like this. You're an obese mother. You just got to learn to step away from the Twinkies. I have had clients come to me for counseling who heard that firsthand.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, it comes in a variety of ways, but it is the devaluation of a woman in her obstetric experience.
Yeah. And so these women that do come to you for some support, many of them, I'm sure, have experienced obstetric violence and probably pretty traumatic births as well. So what do you feel like, because you have so much experience in both of these worlds, like what do you feel like is at the heart of this trauma? Like what's really being wounded in the person, and like why does it? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
I mean, what's behind the perpetrator's behavior?
Yeah, I guess. Like, why do you, because that's something that this one woman in particular that I was helping, she was saying, like, this doctor, she had a home birth, she transferred because of a, like, quote, hemorrhage. The doctor came in and was like, why would you ever decide to have a home birth? Like, you put your baby at risk. Like, you could have died.
Because it's a cult. It's a cult. And this is their, ardent beliefs that they will not allow to be challenged. They toe the line on the cult's belief system. And belief systems are not that easy to change, and they're not going to because it works for them. It gives them power, it gives them control, it gives them money. And behaving as cult members is also what abuses women. Why would she have a home birth? Because she didn't want to have a hospital birth. That's why. She just didn't want to. But this behavior on their part is, you have defied the cult. You will pay. And women find it very hard to leave the cult, to birth at home or to do something else, because when a cult member leaves, it comes at a cost. There is a deep level of punishment and cost to it. And it could even be that they lose the connection to other cult members, which could be their family. So it does come at a cost.
Yeah, and so, like, with that in mind, how did we get to this point where we do have this cult? I know you don't know, like, all, like, you weren't there for the entire history. But like, what is your opinion on how we got to this point where this is what birth looks like?
Well, I think there's a deeper spiritual level behind this. I think there's an unholy spiritual element that has progressed to where it is today.
Can you tell me more about that?
The fight between good and evil. And I think there is an evil element behind it, given the degree of harm that it's causing, the degree of disempowerment, disrespect, and denigration of a woman and her dignity. I think there's truly an evil element behind it.
Okay,
because it is so pervasive.
Yeah.
It's not just 2 or 3 bad eggs. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about global pervasiveness.
Yeah, no, I love this so much because obviously I serve Jesus-loving women. And a big part of that is Jesus' mother, Mary. And if you've ever seen pictures of her where she's like stomping on the snake, like we always just say, like, the devil hates womanhood, hates motherhood, hates women in general. And so what you're saying is, like, I wonder why more people aren't talking about it like this. I don't know. That's just a thought.
The war on faith and the war on faithful people.
Yeah. So interesting. And so I know you don't know the answers to this, but like, how do you, like, what's the first step to have a woman try to take back that ownership of their own experience? Obviously, we probably aren't going to change the whole world, but even if we can just change a little bit in our community, like, that could make a huge difference.
But being women of faith, I don't think there is nothing in God that wants his daughters being hurt and destroyed the way they are. And being women of faith, I think, is elemental to helping more who would like to leave the cult to leave. And that's not to say that eschew all medical services, because that's just foolishness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about returning the dignity and the sovereignty of holy birth and the sanctity of the family back to the family. And then if there is a medical need, you use a medical service. But it shouldn't be as that necessary if we learn how to feed ourselves appropriately, if we learn how to minimize toxic elements in our environment and including our emotional, mental, spiritual, family elements. So we reduce that load too. We're going to be healthier people, and healthier people have healthier pregnancies and births.
Yeah, for sure. And I know whenever you had shared, I forget exactly what it was, but it was something called Call the Neighbor or something. It was these recordings of from a Canadian doctor. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. It's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, we call CBC, is an entirely government-funded media corporation. Its initial mandate was to create Canadian content, and they were paid for by the Canadian government, and it was to highlight Canadian culture, Canadian content. CBC would broadcast, Hockey Night Tonight, and it was, in my parents' generation, a very beloved institution. Today, it is a lying propaganda arm of the current government. Their lies are rampant. They have one side of the story, and they serve as a propaganda machine. Anyway, prior to that, they had a radio program called Doctoring the Family, and it was describing how the care of the family was infiltrated by the doctor, and the care of the family was shifted from the mother and the neighbors tending the birth. Sometimes a neighbor was called. She was my midwife this time, because what it meant was the woman who came over to help while she was having a baby was the midwife, and the midwife was usually the neighbor. And they would write in the family Bible who was the midwife, and it was the neighbor that came over. Common birth knowledge, common birth skills, and then the doctor came along to infiltrate this area and to take over the birth, then also took over the care and feeding of the baby, because the mother wasn't smart enough, and her breastfeeding was unscientific, and she couldn't measure how many milliliters of milk was going into the baby and putting the baby on the schedule. So the doctor came in with their wisdom and their scientific ways of how many minutes per breast. And since you can't measure it, bottle feeding was much more scientific. And then the doctor told them when the baby should be going to sleep and how many hours and how long they should be in bed, and don't overstimulate the baby, and when the baby should eat and what the baby should eat and how you discipline the baby, and removed the mothers and the fathers from the care of their families. This was Doctoring the Family. And it was beautifully told over a 4-part series. Absolutely beautifully told. But yes, in Canadian tradition, prior to the dawn of our country, which we call Confederation, the all-male, brand new Canadian Medical Association went to the all-male parliamentarians of Upper Canada, that later became Ontario, to ask them to make midwifery illegal because they weren't making any money. The mothers knew what to do, and there were always midwives, just like there's always been sex workers. It just doesn't mean the government recognized them, So I get so much flack for this. When I say Canada eliminated midwifery, they're like, no, they didn't. My great aunt was a midwife. Yes, I know she was. And I'm also not talking about a pocket of the world somewhere else. I was talking about what happened in Canada.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, there have always been midwives, because the neighbor who came over was the midwife. It just wasn't a government-sanctioned one. Midwifery was made illegal. So the doctor didn't know enough about birthing babies, and he was too expensive. So in Canada, they called the neighbor. And the neighbor knew common birth knowledge, common birth skills. And the outcomes with the neighbor in terms of mortality were 4 times better. Meaning if a mother went to a hospital with a doctor, she was 4 times more likely to be killed by them. And in terms of morbidity, calling the neighbor was 10 times better. So if a mother went to a hospital with a doctor, there's 10 times higher likelihood that she and or the baby would come out with some sort of morbidity. And in fact, it happened to my grandmother. She had 10, 11 kids at home. And then the last one, they said she should go to the hospital. Well, they killed her. And that was the end of her.
Goodness.
Yeah. So that was the last time she had a baby. And then there were 11 orphans at home.
Oh, wow, I'm sorry.
So her first births were fraternal twins as a young mother. And they were on the prairies, no running water, no electricity. They wouldn't have money for the doctor as newlyweds. So I'm sure just a few neighbors came over and she had twins at home.
Wow, which is unheard of now.
Absolutely unheard of.
If you have twins, it's immediate C-section. Even if you've given birth multiple times.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
And the de-skilling of this industry is gobsmacking. absolutely gobsmacking that they have become so profoundly de-skilled that the reliance is on the ultrasound for technology and surgery.
Yep.
Well, my goodness gracious. We've been doing this since the dawn of time, and now suddenly we've got up to, depending on where you live, 30 to 80% of women being cut open because of their de-skilling. And to think that we companions are practicing medicine without a license or practicing midwifery without a license. So what are you talking about? You don't do this.
Well, so I was
We're not doing surgery. We're doing something that you don't do.
I was just talking with a woman, and it's her first baby. She's young, so very healthy. First baby, her baby ended up being breech. And so, of course, they were like, you have to go to the hospital. And so she went to the hospital. She was literally, her baby's bum was sticking out of the birth canal. Like, you could see it. And they said, nope, we can't have you deliver breech. So they took her to the OR, pushed the baby up, and cut the baby out. And when I heard that, I was like, I didn't even have words, because what in what world is it okay to physically push a baby back up that is already descending and to cut the mother open simply because they're not allowed to do breech births? That is insane.
Stupid.
Yeah.
You have no other word. I mean, I have words, but they probably mostly rhyme with duck. It's stupid. I mean, what kind of people have allowed themselves to have this level of ridiculous skill set that they have to do that to a baby and a mother because they can't facilitate the rest of the birth?
Yeah. And they don't even have to probably do anything. I mean, she was already giving birth. Yeah. They probably just had to sit there and, like you say, catch the baby so it doesn't fall on the floor.
That's it. Yeah.
And it's just infuriating. But
so that's why I say traditional birth companions, we're just more useful humans. Just be a more useful human. If a baby is coming out and a little tushy comes out and the baby needs a little support on the way out, well, be a more useful human.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back to the family dynamic really fast. So where do you see fathers or partners and the role that they play in birth and in sovereignty and keeping that space?
Critically important. So critically important. To be the protector, to be the defender. And again, they have been subject to the same mind control and the same brainwashing we have, and feel that their version of protecting is to make sure she gets to a hospital where the doctor or the nurse or the midwife will be sticking their fingers up her vagina, possibly cutting her open, exposing her, bringing in people to witness this, her humiliation and her degradation. So they've been brainwashed as much as everybody else, thinking this is protecting, but it's not. So again, back to mind control, to understand how men have been programmed to push their women into these untenable situations where I don't know what the stat is now, but prior to COVIDiocy, it was 1 in 8, came out of their birth with PTSD. PTSD is a physical brain injury. You can see what happens to the brain on an MRI. So this industry has given itself permission to cause a physical brain injury in 1 in 8 of its customers. And the partners, the men, have been programmed to believe that this is the safest thing for her. So they need a significant re-education and to call upon their innate strength to deprogram, because they can do it possibly even faster than we can. They don't have, the hormone of accommodation, which is estrogen. They have very, very low hormone of accommodation, and with higher levels of testosterone, they really don't have that desire to be particularly accommodating.
Yeah.
So they have the power, the innate ability, God-given ability to probably deprogram more simply than we do. And if they can deprogram and present that to the family as a way of protecting and looking for safer and saner alternatives, I think it's critical.
Yeah, and I can say that, so my husband had to go through his shift as well. So I was like the catalyst, I would say, or the instigator rather. But once I brought my desires up to him, he didn't say no initially because we have this good relationship of hearing each other out. But it was hard for him to strip away all of that programming that he did have. And I mean, I know that he still feels certain ways whenever I do give birth, because he's like, I just hate seeing you in pain and all that sort of thing, which is fair. But it was hard for him to let go of the idea that it's okay to give birth at home. But it extended even more than that. So I feel like birth was just the thing that was at the surface. But then now everything else that's underneath of that is sort of arisen as well. And so now he's all on board with everything in terms of what we eat, what we even wear, everything in our house, all of this different stuff. And it's all started really with like that reawakening around the whole birth experience?
Birth is a profound catalyst for positive change or for negative implosion. It is a rite of passage. It is life-changing no matter which way it goes. So we really have to focus on helping it become a catalyst for healing and wellness and good and cohesion and, stepping out of a matrix of control that's trying to destroy us.
Yeah. And so birth is described as a rite of passage. And so how do you see birth really shaping a woman's identity, not just as a mother, but as a woman, as a person?
Well, you're never the same person on the other side of it, good or bad. It's a start. So, I finished my first birth journey, a broken, traumatized individual that was barely clinging to, any idea that life could be positive after that. It was absolute torture and struggle. So I was a disaster on the other side of it. But others of my births, well, I came out of them on the other side going, hot damn, did you see what I did?
I know, right? No, That's so good. And so are you one of okay, so I've heard some different phrases of like, we just need to trust birth, but I've also heard we need to respect birth. So where do you lie on that spectrum? Do you believe that you can trust birth, or do you need to respect birth? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't really favor either of those. Birth is how babies come out. That's the design.
Yeah.
And the design works most of the time, or there wouldn't be this many of us. And as with anything, we live in a fallen realm and things are not always perfect. So things unfold simply more often when the mother is cared for and the conditions are favorable. It unfolds very favorably. And then sometimes it doesn't. So be a more useful human. So I think it's trust the mother.
Yeah.
She cares more about herself and her baby than anyone else, and believe her to want to make good choices. So give her some good information.
Yeah, that's so good. So believe her and trust that she doesn't want to die, that she wants to make good decisions.
Absolutely.
It sounds so simple whenever you say it like that.
Yeah, I don't, birth is not for me on some kind of pedestal that, you trust it, you respect it. It's just how humans arrive. So be good to the mother, and if necessary, be a more useful human.
That's so good. And so, So if we stripped all modern interventions away, like, what do you think birth would look like in its purest form?
Oh, goodness, I don't think we should get rid of all modern interventions. I think they are needed to resolve a medical situation when a medical situation arrives. Not all babies can or should be birthed vaginally. I wish they could. I would love to believe that is possible, but we live in the real world and not everything is perfect. And so some babies, some mothers need help. So we can't get rid of it. They do need help from time to time. I would like to see us being able to change the conditions so that mothers and babies need help less often. And that, I think, is entirely possible through way better nutrition, way better information, deprogramming from the death cult of modern maternity services, deprogramming from that, and to have a much clearer idea of what can and should be managed holistically and what can and shouldn't be. And then for the most part, and this is what I've seen over 40 years, for the most part, with good care, good information, good nutrition, she has a good pregnancy, goes into labor, baby comes out.
Yeah, and so
go to bed, start breastfeeding.
Sorry, my little one's getting fussy. And so I asked you that question because I feel like so many women see these beautiful births on Instagram or online or wherever it is that they are, and they feel like that should be their experience. And
it should. It should be their experience.
But they have a hard time realizing or reasoning with, that it's okay to need those medical supports. So what would you say to those women?
If a woman gets into a situation where she recognizes she's going to need some help, well done you. Well done. You are caring about yourself. You are caring about your baby. And our hope is that when she goes to get medical help, she won't be treated like crap by these cult members who think she doesn't have a right to make a choice they wouldn't make for themselves. And sometimes it happens. I hear of it sometimes, not very often, because if they have a great story, they don't come to me. So I don't hear of it very often. Of women who are treated beautifully and have a great experience getting medical help. So it can happen and it should happen. But if that's what happened, well done you. You made a choice for your well-being and your baby's well-being.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing that we need to try to, I personally try to really get out there, is that Like if you made that decision that you felt comfortable with, then like that's all that matters. Like it doesn't matter if it is a repeat C-section or if it is this or that. Like if that's what you like, you did your research, you're educated, and this is what you feel comfortable with, then that's all that really matters.
Absolutely.
And yeah. Okay. And so I know you said your first birth was really terrible. So if you could go back and like whisper anything to yourself before that first birth, what would you say? I know you can't change anything, obviously, but just knowing what you know now.
I wouldn't have heard any of it. I was so indoctrinated.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I could not have heard different input that you don't have to do this. You can say no. You can change practitioner because this one makes you cry. You know, I couldn't have heard it. I was too disempowered and I was too indoctrinated.
That's really insightful and really, yeah, no, that's so good. And so what child or like when abouts do you feel like you started to, would you have started to be able to hear?
It was after, I think she was about 3 months old, and I went to La Leche League to figure out how to more adequately breastfeed this screaming child while in a state of absolute trauma. And I met women who liked having babies. They're insane. Nobody likes having babies. What are you talking about? And they liked it, and they just didn't use the medical cartel. They just stayed home and they called the neighbor. So they were with each other. So the turning point for me was meeting women who were in this condition of joy that I had never seen. And that was just mind-blowing.
Yeah. So it's basically circling back to that, just trying to put yourself in circles that might make you a little uncomfortable at first. Not uncomfortable in like not feeling welcome, but just stretching your own limits and knowledge.
Absolutely shocked, gobsmacked.
Yeah.
That these women were not traumatized. They liked it. They'd probably have another baby.
Yeah. No, I know. And so I'm at that point now where like, thankfully, because of the work that I have done, like that's how I feel now. But I know 7 years ago, that is not how I felt at all. And it's really hard to get to that point. And so before we wrap up, what is the most important piece of wisdom that you would share with the discerning mother?
Oh my goodness. Birth is how babies arrive. It's just part of our humanity. And our humanity is not scary. It's not our enemy. You know, to be pregnant and to have a baby is not that you're entering into a war zone with your own physiology. It's treated that way. And in the medical model, the mother and the baby are seen as pretty much enemies of one another. If most of the medical testing in the first half of pregnancy is looking for defects in the baby to offer termination. And then most of the testing in the second half is to detect abnormalities or variations in the mother to rescue the baby from the mother. So they're seen as these at odds with one another within the medical industry, and to recognize that we're not at odds with one another. That precious little one is an integral part of our physiology and our emotions and our spirit and our being, and so deeply connected to one another, so that when it's time to release the little one from womb to arms, it's not a taking, a snatching, a horrific experience. It's this transition where baby has been nestled inside of us under our heart, connected and loved and nurtured, to move where it's now time to be nestled next to our heart, between our breasts, smelling their sweet little head. And that, to me, is what birth is. Getting that baby from one part of its growth in an environment of pure love to an environment where they're ready to be exposed to siblings and parents and daddy, you know, their version of play with them, and they're ready for that.
Yeah.
But it's just that transition from one to the other. This is not the, oh my gosh, get an epidural.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful transition.
Oh, that's so
And
beautiful.
can it be, less than beautiful each time? Sure. But we can do better. We really can do better.
No, that's so beautiful and so good. Just so good. And so I know that you have some exciting things happening. So how can people find you, reach out to you, learn more from you?
BillieHarrigan.com. And then you can find out about the upcoming Traditional Birth Companion course. We're starting a new cohort in September. Can't wait. We're going to have so much fun again. That course includes becoming trauma informed, or if you just want to know more about trauma, resilience, healing, the Becoming Trauma Informed course is on its own. And then I also have a private member association for connection. And private member associations are of the premise, and mine is absolutely very benevolent, so that we operate on the golden rule. We are to care for one another the way we need to be cared for, do no harm, and to deal with one another in integrity and benevolence and in the private realm, so we can accomplish something that we can't do in the public realm. We can't transform birth by joining the medical cartel and thinking we're going to make a difference. We might for one or two people, but we're not going to change it. So we have to do something in the private realm that cannot be accomplished in the public realm. So there's a PMA to join if you like.
And again, I would highly, highly recommend joining the TBC course. It was amazing. And definitely reach out to Billie if you have any questions. And Billie, thank you so much for being on. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. And again, just such a blessing to have you here.
Oh, we had so much fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you.